Okay, hey, my name is Sauermoser. I'm a PhD student at the NTNU in Trondheim in Norway. And today I'm going to give a talk about PEM fuel cell performance studies of a tree-like pattern milled on graphite flow-through plates. And this was done together with Signe Kjelstrup, Natalia Kisilova, and Bruno Pollet. So at the beginning of this talk, I will talk a little bit about the motivation of this project, namely the polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell efficiency. And in this whole talk, I will focus on the so-called flow-through plate, which is the gas distribution system in a fuel cell. And we're talking about fuel cells which use hydrogen as fuel. And on the cathodes, they use oxygen, and the only byproduct will then be water. In the next few slides, then I will talk about the design of the flow-through plates, followed by the complete experimental fuel cell setup. I will talk about which experiments have been done, and then I will give a summary of the results and a quick discussions of the different tests, namely the performance, hold, and EIS tests. And in the end, I will give a conclusion and a summary of this whole project. So as I said, the motivation is the polymer electrolyte membrane fuel cell efficiency. And when we talk about the high efficiency, we talk about high power density, so watts per square centimeter. And this can be achieved by improving different parts in the fuel cells, different materials, technology, or even the operating regime. And we are focusing on the flow-through plate. So the increased efficiency of a fuel cell with the help of the flow-through plate, we need to have these 4 points. So we need to have uniform gas distribution with a small pressure drop. We need to have high electric conductivity, so a low electric resistance. And we need to have a uniform temperature distribution, followed by a good water removal at the cathode, because here we have the water production from the electrochemical reaction. And there are newly developed so-called tree-like flow-through plates, which seem to be promising. They're also sometimes called fractal-likes or biomimetic flow-through plates. And we were looking at them, and the aim was to experimentally measure the fuel cell efficiency for those tree-like flow-through plates for different width scaling parameters. So the width scaling parameter defines how the width changes along the different generations with this equation, and A is then the width scaling parameter. And in our previous work, we have shown that an increase in this width scaling parameter A lowers the entropy production of the system, and thus should give us a better performance. So here you can see two designs of those tree-like flow-through plates. And the special thing here is that they are made out of two layers. So we have an inlet plate and an outlet plate, each with separate tree-like patterns. And those were milled in Schunk graphite plates by HISA Systems Competence Center in South Africa with CNC milling. And another specialty of these plates is that they're only connected with the last branch. You see those slots here and here of the inlet pattern. And we were investigating different width scaling factors for the inlet and outlet pattern. But all of those designs have a starting width of 1 millimeter and a starting depth of 1 millimeter in the inlet pattern. And for the outlet, those two numbers were 0.8. The inlet had 9 generations, where the 9th one is here at the outlet plate. And the outlet pattern had 7 generations. So coming to the experimental setup and protocol, we compared these newly designed flow-through plates against standard serpentine design with one channel. And the comparison was done on the cathode. On the anode, we used in all cases a one-channel serpentine design. We had a fuel cell with 25 square centimeter active cell size, and as cell temperature we used 80 degrees Celsius. Pure hydrogen and oxygen was used as gases on the anode and cathode, and we investigated 3 different relative humidity values, 70, 60 and 50%, both on the anode and cathode. The stoichiometric coefficients were 2 for the hydrogen and 6 for the oxygen, and we used an overpressure of 0.5 bar, both at the anode and cathode. And here you can see the different tree-like designs with the different width scaling factors. So experiment 2 used at the inlet 0.917 and in the outlet 0.925. And for the third experiment, we exchanged the outlet width scaling factor to 1. So this means that there is no change of the channel width. And in the fourth case, the channel width didn't change at all. We performed 3 different experiments. We had a performance test at all relative humidities. We had an electrochemical impedance spectroscopy from 10 kilohertz down to 0.1 hertz at 7.5, 15 and 22.5 ampere. Again, at all relative humidity values. And then we also had a 3-hour hold test at all relative humidity values and constant 20 ampere. Here you can see a picture of the experimental setup. So this box here is the Baltic Fuel Cell QCF FC25 support frame, which allows us to control the compression with a pneumatic cylinder. We set the compression to 1 Newton per square millimeter at all experiments. The black tubes here are the heated gas lines, and the white ones are the outlet lines, both for the anode side and the cathode side. The blue box here is the fuel cell test station, which was a biologic FCT50S. And the red line here is the power cable. So here is the first results of the experiments, which is from the performance tests. And the results are displayed as an IV curve and a power curve. And the serpentine, so the reference case, is the dashed dot line. And the other lines are the tree-like flow-through patterns. And at 3 different relative humidity values, as you can see here. And the first thing you can see is that the tree-like flow-through plates generally give all together a lower power density or performance. This ranges between 8% up to over 30%. And the black line here is the experiment 2 with a scaling factor for the inlet of 0.917 and 0.925 at 70% relative humidity. Actually has quite some comparable performance when it comes to power peak. So the difference is only 8%. However, the worst performing pattern was the one with no width scaling. So the next tests were then hold tests. And over 3 hours, a constant current was held. And there you can see for different behaviors, for example, how does the fuel cell handle water problems and so on. So the first thing you can see is that decreasing the relative humidity, of course, makes the system more stable because you have less water in the system. And at the highest relative humidity values, where you would assume that there are the most water problems, you can see that the green line here, which was experiment 3, had some serious water problems symbolized by those sharp drops in voltage. The one with width scaling parameter of 1 for both inlet and outlet was actually quite stable, and the best performing tree-like flow-through pattern had some drops but not as severe as experiment 2. However, when you reduce the relative humidity, as said, water problem starts to reduce, and you can actually see that the red line, which was experiment 2, showed an improvement compared to the serpentine pattern in terms of water problems. You don't have these jumps up and down here. But also the other tree-like flow-through plates showed some major improvements. So to get a deeper insight in how the fuel cell performs with the different flow-through plates, we performed electrochemical impedance spectroscopy at the different relative humidity values and 3 different currents. And here you can see the results for the serpentine pattern, experiment 2, 3, and 4. Sorry, 4 and 3. And the biggest change or difference between the reference pattern and our new designs is that you see a really big semicircle at the lower frequencies. And furthermore, when you look here at the intersection with the real axis, you can see that all of them actually have so all tree-like flow field plates have a higher resistance compared to the serpentine pattern. And to get a better insight on what is causing those semicircles and so on, we did a circuit fitting. And this circuit fitting was done using a modified Reynolds circuit in MATLAB with an open source circuit fitting algorithm, which was then modified a bit to allow for lower and upper boundaries to get comparable values from the different fits. And we have here R1, which is the cell resistance, the electrolyte resistance. Then this parallel loop symbolizes the anode, and this parallel loop symbolizes the cathode, where a Warburg diffusion impedance is included. And this R1 here, as already said at the previous slide, we can see a higher resistance of the cell for experiment 4 and 2, but the experiment 3 actually had a comparable resistance value to the serpentine pattern. But this could also be an effect of measuring tolerance or the circuit fitting, because it should be also in this region here. So when we look here at the Warburg diffusion impedance, we see actually a huge difference between the serpentine pattern and our new designs, which is actually more than 1 order of magnitude higher at some points. And the problem here could be that the Warburg diffusion impedance tells you something about the resistance against mass transport. So it shows diffusion problems, for example. And the reason for this could be water problems. So pores in a gas diffusion get blocked by water, so the gas has problems diffusing through this gas diffusion layer. Another indicator for water problems is R3 here. We see that for the serpentine and experiment 1, we see a constant decrease of R3, which symbolizes the charge transfer resistance. But for the other 2 experiments, so 3 and 4, we see that at 22.5 ampere, it's suddenly increased sharply. And this can also be an indication for water problems. So in the end, we can say that we found a tree-like flow field plate with a scaling factor of 0.917 at the inlet and 0.925 at the outlet, was the most beneficial one out of all 3 tested designs. However, the performance of those tree-like flow field plates was still worse than the serpentine pattern. So we're talking in best case 8% lower, in the worst case 36% lower. And we suspect that the water management is the biggest problem. So future work needs to be done to try different version of those patterns to get rid of those big problems with the water. And when it comes to the optimization approaches, we also need to include electric resistance and thermal effects. So doing Pareto frontiers to include all effects and not only hydrodynamic effects to optimize those patterns for a real case. Thank you very much.